Hi and welcome everyone to our 70th episode of The Little Inside. To my great surprise, I'm still Tobi, even after 70 episodes. It's weird. Well, anyways, this episode I'm going to talk a little bit about the pain of me and mine. So let's get started right after the intro. Even though it often might appear as if the sense of me and mine was the very greatest thing in the entire universe, it is actually not. That's because the self, or the sense of me or mine that comes with it, is actually at the root of all the pain that we experience. And why is that? Well, if there is no sufferer, how can there be suffering? So first of all, there is not only just one self. There are many kinds of selves existing within our mind. And all of these selves have been conditioned and trained, and they are all there. And some of them are arising and passing a bit more frequent than others, but we do have generally a lot of different types of feeling of me. So there's for example, a very simple one. There's the hungry me, or there is the male or the female me. There is the meditation teacher or the meditation student me. There is the husband me, and so forth. There's many different types of selves that exist within my mind. So what is it that actually nourishes and feeds these kind of different selves? Well, first of all, it's my past. Throughout my lifetime, I have become very used to this body, for example. So I'm very identified with this body. I would feel that, yes, this is me. When I look into the mirror, I see, yes, this is me. I might feel like, yes, I'm a man. I am 34 years old. I am a meditation teacher, or I'm a meditation student, depending on who I'm spending my time with. All these kind of ideas, they might arise because in the past I've done certain things, I have had certain experiences which all contributed to the building of certain selves. And so these selves, they can be triggered. For example, when I'm in the presence of my teacher, then I become a meditation student. When I'm in the presence of my students, then I become a meditation teacher. It's depending on what kind of circumstances are currently around there or within myself, that a certain self arises or is born. So it's certainly not always the case that we all have one self at all times. You have this famous example of a police officer that works as a police officer and turns back home and then stays the police officer in his family. So this is kind of like the self, it's bleeding into the family life. The business self is bleeding into the family life. But it's also not constant, because each time when you go to sleep at night, you assume many other types of self. Right now I'm the flying elephant type of self, or I'm another type of dream self, or in deep sleep, no self, no sense of me or mine, no sense of time either. Then coming back out of that, then dreaming self again, then waking selves again, many different types of self at all times. And all these selves, they have one agenda. They want to be happy. They don't want to suffer. Yes? So wanting to be happy, not wanting to suffer, that's what we all do all over the world. This is the cause of all wars. This is the cause of all the imbalance that's existing in this world. And there's a whole lot of selves that live together on this planet. And all of those selves are basically looking for the same thing. They all want to be happy. They don't want to suffer. And while looking for this happiness, and while looking to get out of suffering, they're creating an enormous, unbelievable amount of pain and suffering. If you look at human history, that's the proof. Now, for some particular types of self, thoughts and emotions are the main nutrition. It's kind of the food that keeps that self well nourished. A certain way of thinking, a certain way of feeling, the way of thinking leading to certain feelings, the feelings leading then again to corresponding thoughts and so forth. It creates and nourishes and sustains a certain sense of self. And it's important also to know that while we're doing this continuously, it's not a fixed thing. You can actually change by the way you think and feel. You can change one personality into another, which is very good actually, and is a very skillful thing to do. You want to choose yourselves wisely. You want to choose your kind of personalities wisely. And one of your greatest powers actually is to choose who you want to be right now, and then to act that out, of course, and actually reap the benefits, reap the results of your own positive actions coming from a healthy sense of self. So I don't want to deny self. I don't want to say that self is only a bad thing or something like this. No, it's our vehicle. So it's really important. It's our vehicle to get where? Well, to get to the end of all problems. And that is found when we are encountering not self, when we are understanding that all these conditioned, made up senses of me and mine are actually not truly real. There's something that is made up. Like the famous example here again would be a forest. A forest exists depending on all the trees that come together. And then we label it. All the trees together, we call it a forest, right? Like if you have a lot of things coming together, you call it a certain way. You have a lot of things, a lot of elements coming together, you call it Tobi, right? So this is how that self actually exists. We cannot say Tobi doesn't exist or the forest doesn't exist. It exists, but in a very specific way. If you actually go and you look for the forest, you will not find any forest. You will find trees, you will find bark, you will find sand, you will find leaves, you will find air, you will find all the elements present, yet you will not find forest in a single atom there. There is nothing like a forest. Yes? So the same thing that the self that I feel to be, like Tobi, the meditation teacher, it is, you can say it's a designation that is based on the coming together of many different things. The students, my body, certain emotional states, and then you have like the meditation teacher. But truly, there is no such thing as really a meditation teacher. But with the arising of the idea that I am a meditation teacher, there are also many, many different consequences that I have to deal with later on. And so this is not the way out of suffering, of course. It's a way into infinite manifestation of different selves, and all their consequences is very, very complicated, very complex, but it doesn't lead to ultimately, it doesn't lead to peace. So now when you practice meditation, when you actually sit down and you do your practice, you're coming into present moment awareness, and then you let go of thinking. Very often, many people feel a sense of fear arising, or a sense of like old dark emotions rising up to the surface. That's not uncommon. And I consider that to be kind of like when you are quiet, when the mind doesn't think, when you're really, really present, the most of the nutrition for the idea of a me and a mine is not there. So yourself becomes, you can say, malnourished. There's no food to sustain it. And if you're staying in presence over sustained periods of time, there's a dissolution process happening. There's, of course, the happiness, the joy that is within presence automatically and naturally, that shines more and more. But on the other side, also that what is not allowing you to access or tap into your natural resources, natural happiness, that which is in its way, also kind of wants to come back into it. It has a life of its own. It doesn't want to die. That one thing that this self is most afraid of is death, dissolution. And so very often for spiritual practitioners, there is a fear of death, which is kind of inexplicable. It just arises in our meditation practice. And that's that. It's this little self that becomes more and more malnourished, giving way to a greater sense of being, not as a self, but just simply as presence. And within that presence, all the old kind of sense of selves that we have usually can slowly be discarded one by one. So the way I see it, first of all, it's really important to establish a healthy sense of self, or many different types of selves that are actually beneficial, that are good. Once you do that more and more, then you don't need all the negative sense of selves anymore that usually give you a hard time in a difficult life. Then you practice more and more meditation. Then you have a different kind of thing to rely upon, which is mindfulness, awareness, presence, a state of being rather than a state of selfing. So that's how that develops. So self is not our enemy. It's not something to be fought off. Okay? Self must be used wisely and skillfully on the path. Or you don't have to say must, but it can be used wisely and skillfully, so it leads you out of the thicket of suffering and problems towards an ever greater sense of happiness, liberation, freedom, and inner peace and easefulness. Now, it's not our enemy, it's not something to push aside, yet also it is not something to be endlessly cultivated. So we are using the self like a boat. We're using it to get to the island of liberation from all suffering. Once we are on the island, as the example goes, we don't need to carry the boat around with us any longer. But we need to use the boat to get to the island. So self is important. You cannot just deny self from the beginning. That's kind of ridiculous. You're denying your vehicle. And by denying it, you don't make it go away. You're simply creating another type of self that now denies a self. So it's very tricky. It's best to simply follow the path step by step and properly. And particularly important also to do it under the guidance of a qualified spiritual guide. And then everything will be fine. So don't deny yourself. Use it wisely. And as you grow on this path, there is less and less need to rely on so many different kinds of problematic selves. You're basically then starting to rely on something else which is more powerful, more expansive, such as awareness, mindfulness, and these awakened or liberated qualities. So this is pretty much all that comes to mind for this week about the self. I hope you enjoyed it and gave you some further insights. If you do have any questions or comments, feel free to write them down in the comment section below. I'm always happy to receive your comments and read them. And wish all of you guys a wonderful next week. And look forward to see you all again next Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.